All right. And I'm also going to put in the chat the link to the presentation today. There are just a ton of links throughout the presentation that just in case you want to wander off and click on any of those while we're going through, I wanted you to have access to that as well. Okay. And again, feel free to put name, church, organization in the chat if you'd like to, pronouns if you'd like to include those. But we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure people will still be joining us. I am Christina Collins. I'm the Executive Director of Honesty for Ohio Education, she, her pronouns. I am so glad that you are all choosing to be with us today to learn about this very important topic. I'm going to be providing an overview about RTRI in general, LifeWise Academy. We're going to talk about why that's one of the main programs that we talk about often. Then we're going to hear some remarks from Reverend Dr. Hillscamp and Reverend Dr. McIntosh. And then we'll go into some discussion and some questions. But feel free throughout to put any questions or comments or anything that you might have in the chat box as we go. And we will come back to those throughout. In case you're not familiar with Honesty for Ohio Education, we are a coalition of 70 plus organizations. We are a 501c3. We just became a 501c3. We are nonpartisan. We work statewide. We do advocacy, education, and building community work, again, across the state of Ohio. We are funded by some foundations and funders, but also by donors. So if that's something that your heart feels compelled to do, we are very appreciative of donations from individuals. So again, today we're going to be talking about release time for religious instruction. And I want to start with how we got here. My background, just by way of information, I have been in education my entire career. I was a high school English teacher and then a curriculum director for about 10 years before I went to serve on the State Board of Education. So some of my experiences with religious release time were when I was in a district. 2014, I was in a district and a law was passed that enabled schools to allow religious release time. A lot of school boards at that time thought these programs don't really exist. So sure, fine, let's just pass this policy and make people happy because they thought nobody's really taking advantage of this. Nobody really understands what it is. That was the district that I was in. They kind of just passed the policy, didn't really worry about it. Originally, the explanation for the bill was that it was intended to address specific religious needs, so like prayer needs during the school day. At that point, we did not have what we have now, religious exemption days for students to leave school for their religious observances. So that was part of this bill as well, was allowing students to observe their religious practices. I do want to make a note at the very beginning of this. As I mentioned, Honesty is a coalition of 70 different organizations. We represent faith-based organizations, LGBTQ organizations, a lot of different groups. But we believe that public education is where people come together to learn and discuss what we have in common in an inclusive, diverse, pluralistic society. So to that extent, Honesty supports all religions and believes in honoring all religious traditions. Honesty does not support religious indoctrination. I want to comment here too. We're going to talk about House Bill 445 a little later on. And when House Bill 445 was introduced to mandate that schools allow RTRI programs, Honesty was initially an interested party on that conversation. But it became clear pretty quickly, as we're going to talk about today, that there was really just one very well-funded program that was behind the push to mandate RTRI in schools. At that point, when we realized what was happening, that's when the Honesty Coalition took on an opposing stance to the bill. So we'll talk more in detail about that. This is the program that I mentioned. So I'm going to talk a lot about LifeWise throughout this. And the reason for that is LifeWise is the #1 most well-funded program in Ohio. LifeWise Academy is the full name. We are the epicenter for LifeWise. I'm going to show you some images with maps to help make that picture clearer, what that looks like. And so they're really the dominant program, and they're also the lobbying voice paired with the Center for Christian Virtue. They're the lobbying voice really pushing this legislation. So what is LifeWise? As I mentioned, they are an exceptionally well-funded program, and their explicit goals are of being state and nationwide. The person that started the program, Joel Penton, talks about the McDonald's model of just being able to implement this program everywhere, just being able to pop one up in every community. Really, it's a lot like some of the MLMs, like the beach bodies of the world, that we've heard about in the last 10 years, because it is a model that kind of can be replicated everywhere and amasses funds for LifeWise Academy. So it appeared around 2021 in Ohio. That was during the time when I was on the State Board of Education. At that time, they talked about having maybe 20 programs in the state. And they talked about their goal being to reach unchurched public school students. That's been their explicit goal. It's been Joel Penton's goal. It used to be on the website. I'm not sure if it's still one of the highlights on the website, but that has been their goal. These programs in general, RTRI programs, their goal is to take students from school to an offsite location for Bible education at some point during the school day. And this particular version, LifeWise, this particular program has a high view of the authority of Scripture that is aligned with historic Orthodox Christian beliefs, meaning a literal interpretation of the Bible. That is in their mission documents, their belief documents. They explicitly state that that is their slant on the Bible education they provide to students. LifeWise requires a 10-step process. This is within their model in order to get a LifeWise Academy in a local school district. So again, I can put the link to the presentation in the chat again in just a minute, or if somebody would like to refresh that in case anybody came in late, you can go in and look up your school district. I live in Medina City Schools. At one point, I looked up our school district to see what step they were on. At that point, they were on step 6 in our school district. Part of the 10-step process, and this is really important, is they have to have church support from the community. One of the connections that we've made in terms of LifeWise is the churches that support LifeWise programs become their preferred churches for referrals when students and their families are looking for churches to attend in the area. Interestingly, a lot of these churches that engage in these programs are also voucher accepting private schools, meaning through LifeWise, taking students out of public education, taking them to these preferred churches, referring students and families to these referred churches, who also happen to be voucher accepting private schools. That can be one perspective on the program, is that it is pumping up vouchers for these private schools for their preferred churches. This is a map from when I did this RTRI presentation in May, June, maybe. I did it at a local school. This is what the LifeWise saturation looked like at that time. So you can see who was on step 10, who was on step 1. Columbus on this map is right here in the middle. So we see kind of we kind of see this saturation across Ohio, a little bit of green, a little bit of expansion in the states around it. And I want to compare that to the map I pulled today to show the vastness of expansion that LifeWise is experiencing. Again, Columbus is right here in the middle. So just to go back and forth one more time, we can see in this image, this most recent image, 245 districts are on step 10, and step 1, which is just starting to start the process of implementing LifeWise, just over 8,000 districts today. And again, going back just a few months ago, there were 247 districts on step 1 and 196 districts on step 10. So that demonstrates just the speed at which they are implementing these programs. So who is LifeWise? Just a little more information about LifeWise. This is one of their philosophy statements, the idea that every public student in this nation should have the opportunity to learn the Word of God as part of their school day. This came from the book written by Joel Penton about this. He says, imagine students during school hours learning about the fundamental message of the Bible, the gospel, who Jesus is, what he did for us, how he changes hearts, lives, families, and eternal souls. So what we see here is the goal of LifeWise is for as many students as possible during the school day to be exposed to their brand of Christianity. Why is their messaging problematic? Why is all of this problematic? So when we talk about their instruction, they used to have a publicly available document on their website called Difficult Questions from Students. I believe that has since been taken down, but this link that is available in the presentation goes to a record of that document that used to be available. These are the kinds of things that they're teaching students. So for example, with respect to respecting your parents. How can I honor my parents who do not follow God? We can't expect people who don't love God to follow him, but we should still be respectful towards them. When faced with a choice to obey God or our parents, we should always obey God first. And I forgot to mention, and this is an important piece of this, right now, the target are the youngest students in elementary school. So we're talking K1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There is expansion into some high school programming, but we're talking about our youngest students and the messaging that LifeWise is sharing to our youngest students. Another question, my mom's boyfriend lives with us. Is that a sin? Basically, when two people reject God's plan and choose to live together without getting married first, God says it's a sin. We've got some LGBTQ questions. What would God think if I changed my gender? We should respect and trust God's perfect design and how he created us. The Bible teaches us God made us male or female. What does the Bible say about same-sex relationships, LGBTQ issues? God's word tells us anything different from a man and a woman in this kind of romantic relationship is a sin. And finally, does God hate people in the LGBT community? God is perfect. All sin angers him and makes him sad. God wants us to turn away from sin and do what is right. So teaching this one kind of ideology when it comes to the makeup of families and people's lifestyles. Why is this problematic? I think that alone is one big problematic piece of this, but in general, RTRI, LifeWise Academy, are tied to the explicit goals of Project 2025, which is all in line with Trump administration. What would Trump's plans be? What would he do for the nation or to the nation, whichever way you want to think about it. But so Project 2025 embedded throughout that is bringing back Christian nationalism and these kinds of Orthodox Christian values. Programs like this inhibit students' freedom from religion in their public school education. What we hear a lot about is students being incentivized to recruit other students to these programs. Students going back to their school and telling other students they're going to hell because they're not Christian or because their families, their parents are LGBTQ or in the LGBTQ community. So we hear a lot of student-to-student issues happening. Again, inhibiting some students from the freedom from religion. Like I said, incentivizing students to recruit these discriminatory teachings. There's some serious safety concerns that come up out of this. LifeWise is one program. There are many other programs. The majority of the programs use private background check tools. For those of you familiar with background checks for schools, to even volunteer in most schools these days, you have to have a BCI and FBI check. So these programs are using private sources. People are not well vetted. We have seen problematic issues come out with some of the instructors that particularly LifeWise has hired that have a history, a problematic history. So there are many safety concerns tied to just the people that are running these programs when they are taking children away from the school. It's also problematic because the State Department of Education has now named these school-related functions, these programs. So that sets up our local school boards to be in a kind of precarious situation with enforcing their policies on these programs or monitoring, providing oversight of these programs and what's happening. Finally, LifeWise specifically has been promoted by Project 2025 backers, including the Heritage Foundation. And we have a link here to additional concerns that Honesty's identified around House Bill 445, which we'll discuss in just a minute. Lots of links to some resources here, again, if you'd like to pursue those later. We want to talk, though, about House Bill 445. So this bill was introduced in March of this year. It has been assigned to the House Primary and Secondary Education Committee. It was originally expected to move pretty quickly. We'll talk about where it's at in just a moment. But the complementary bill in the Senate is Senate Bill 293. House Bill 445 and Senate Bill 293 are the exact same bill in both chambers of our state house, and they change one word in Ohio Revised Code to go from a school district may adopt a policy that allows students to be excused from school to a school district shall or will adopt a policy that would enable students to be excused from school. So up until this point, since 2014, school districts have been able to make that choice for themselves. We do have communities across Ohio where RTRI programs exist and are working well, and people are happy with them, and the community is fine. And we're not saying to take away those programs, let local communities decide if that's what's right for them. What we've seen this year, just in 2024, are school districts reconsidering their policies if they adopted them, putting in some guardrails to protect students. So simple things like, in order for a program to exist in our district, all instructors must have BCI and FBI checks, those kinds of protections that are having to be added to these policies. There are many districts, again, I live in Medina, city schools. Medina is a district that has not adopted a policy. So LifeWise and any similar programs cannot come into our district because we don't have a policy allowing any of those programs to exist. Bordering schools up in Medina County do have those programs, but Medina has just chosen not to. So there are many different places that school districts across Ohio are in because they have been allowed to choose whether or not to have those policies in the past. Our superintendent and our school board members in Medina did let some of us know. Some of us went to testify about 445 and let them know what was going on with LifeWise. And they did tell us that they were receiving incredible pressure from LifeWise to adopt a policy so that LifeWise could exist here. So given that that's just one sample of a school district, I imagine that that is also happening in school districts across Ohio, just based on those saturation maps. And that is the kind of pressure that we're seeing at the State House to pass this bill that would force all schools to have this policy. So what does all of this mean? Yesterday at the State House, I testified on behalf of Honesty about House Bill 445. Currently, there is a lot of pressure to move those bills along to make this happen across Ohio. Yesterday, we were able to hear from some of the more conservative lawmakers about their reasoning behind wanting to see this pass so badly. The key reasoning being parents' rights, that parents should have the right to decide for their students to participate in these programs during the school day. One of the things that we heard yesterday was reference to the state constitution. And I know this is small, so I'm just going to read this little section of it that one of the representatives read to us during testimony yesterday. It says, religion, morality, and knowledge, however, being essential to good government, it shall be the duty of the General Assembly to pass suitable laws to protect every religious denomination in the peaceable enjoyment of its own mode of public worship, and to encourage schools and the means of instruction, which, translating what the lawmakers and committee said yesterday, they are taking to mean that they should be creating spaces in public education for students to receive religious instruction. A couple other things that came up yesterday, I mentioned parents' rights, but one of the interesting questions is why this bill? Why now? I mean, districts have been able to decide on their own for the last 10 years. What problem are we currently trying to solve? And that problem is that programs like LifeWise cannot access students in districts that don't have policies. And when we have a program like LifeWise, whose goal is to be statewide and nationwide to push these kinds of Christian nationalist beliefs into our schools, they want to have access to all the schools. They want to have access to a school like mine in Medina. This fits the overarching narrative of Project 2025 and this spread of these Christian nationalist beliefs. Like I mentioned, that constitutional obligation that these lawmakers see, they see that, and in fact, one of them commented, this is about the freedom of religion, not the freedom from religion, is what Representative Lear said. And importantly, why this pressure right now on this issue? We're currently in what is called lame duck session. So at the end of every 2-year General Assembly, so we're at the end of the 135th General Assembly, the 136th with the elections that just happened, that will begin in January. At the end of every 2 years, any bill that hasn't passed dies in the legislature and has to be completely reintroduced and go through the process again the following year in January or thereafter. So there is incredible pressure right now to push through this bill and mandate that all schools have these policies, all schools allow these programs, because otherwise they'll have to start the process over in January. And finally, I'm going to end on this, and then, like I said, we'll hear from our speakers, and then we'll do some questions and things. But I will put this back up at the end as well. So, what can we do right now? Our honesty, our current actions around this QR code will take you to a form where you can email all the members of the House and Senate Education Committee. That's the number one action that can be done right now. We provided some talking points here as far as local control, this lack of guardrails, concerns for the materials, but also what we've heard from both the chair of the House committee and members of the Senate committee is they're not hearing from faith organizations that there is any concern about this. Now, there was a pastor who spoke yesterday and testified, and she was questioned on why her church wouldn't just run its own program. And she said, public education is fundamental to our church's beliefs. We don't believe that we should be taking students away from their education time during the day because that is fundamental to what we believe as a congregation. So they are not hearing from faith organizations. They're not hearing from faith leaders that they're concerned about this. So I would encourage you, if you feel compelled to do so, to use this link or to reach out to your representative and let them know that you have thoughts about this. Sorry, there's a fly flying around my head. And then I'll leave it on this. I do encourage you to join Honesty's mailing list, especially right now. Legislation is going quickly in the State House, and our mailing list is the way that we get information out to people about what is moving. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are questions just from the general overview before we move into our speakers. So I'm just looking at the chat for a quick minute, and I will just pause off and see if there's anything. And then Natalie, also feel free if there's anything you'd like to add to what I said. Natalie has been our honesty lead on RTRI issues. So Natalie, I'll just leave it to you too. See if you want to say anything.
Sorry, I had the chat. I was trying to unmute myself. Hey, yeah, I would just add that specifically when I called Chair Manning's office, I guess, I don't know, was that Friday? Was that Monday? I can't recently about this hearing. The aide seemed surprised to learn that there were religious organizations that opposed this. So even though there's been a lot of visibility, thanks to a lot of local faith communities to their school district. It seems like the people who, they may not listen, but the people who need to hear it in the House Primary and Secondary Ed Committee haven't received enough feedback about that to make a dent. Reverend Zuss, it was Reverend Vicky Zuss, for those of you who know her, who spoke. They seemed genuinely confused why she wouldn't be participating. And in general, they are taking an attack of, like Christina said, religious freedom, and that this is an attack on their expression of religion. And so that message comes that message feels a lot more earnest coming from faith leaders than from anyone else, frankly. So that is another message that we'd love for you to convey if you were interested, just like supporting the public school hours, and also just that, however you might express it. But if you don't have local students coming to you saying that they feel like their religious freedom is violated, then I think the committee needs to hear it.
Thanks, Natalie. And we have a question. What about other religious beliefs? As far as the existence of other religious RTRI programs, they're pretty minimal. And Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong on that. I know there are some programs in Cleveland. As far as other students being able to have other religious beliefs in school, we are hearing stories, and one of the other testifiers talked about this. We are hearing stories of students feeling pressured, whether they are Christian or not, and most of them in not being Christian that this story applies to, but these students feeling pressured to go to these programs because so many of their friends are going, or their friends are coming back with, like I said, incentives and that kind of thing. But there was one story about a school principal saying to a Hindu student that he needed Jesus. That was one of the stories that has been shared. And again, these are all kinds of, yes, they're anecdotal. We're hearing them from the ground, but they are stories that we are hearing that are happening in Ohio. Martina, your hand raised. Sorry, Natalie, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to answer the question in the chat, but I'll do that next.
Okay, Martina.
So I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I just graduated from seminary. I'm not ordained yet, but I mean, to us, religious education would be world religions and not promotion of a particular religion. My grandson was in a district where they were, given this opt-out thing. And what needs to be recognized about that is that places tremendous pressure, peer pressure, on that kid. When they pop up and say, I don't want to go to Bible class, there's going to be peer pressure. My son had contacted Freedom from Religion and ACLU and was ready to file a suit. And then just as things happened, he accepted a job in another state and it didn't come to be. But I think it endangers children.
Yeah. I think to that point, let's go to our guest speakers for a moment. I'm going to introduce first Reverend Dr. Amariah McIntosh, who is a CME pastor in Akron, Ohio, and the Associate Director of Ohio Council of Churches, Justice Advocacy, and I'm going to mess up this word.
Ecumenical.
Yes, I could not wrap my head around that right now. I'm so sorry. That work has been her ministry passion for over 40 years. She's an empty nester with 3 adult children and their spouses and 5 grandchildren. And we've brought our speakers in today to talk about how their organizations, how their faith is thinking about this issue, and how they're kind of reconciling beliefs and practices with what's happening in our public schools.
Okay, well, I am, as Christina said, the Associate Director of the Ohio Council of Churches, which is a statewide organization made up of 18 Christian faith tradition, uh, Methodists, Episcopals, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Orthodox, Society of Friends. So we've got a great group.
Dr. McIntosh, it's a little hard to hear you. It's a little hard. I don't know. It's like you're talking through a bag.
Well,
Earphones don't
Oh,
always
there
work.
it is. There it is.
All right, you can hear me now? Oh, I don't know. Anyhow, we represent 18 Christian denominations. We don't recall the legislature or LifeWise asking any of us our opinions on this thing. We believe in the separation of church and state. We believe that public education should be just that, public education, without any imposition of faith beliefs of any kind. What LifeWise and those are proposing is stepping on the toes of our church tradition's Christian education and evangelism and outreach ministries. If you want to reach the unchurched children, do it the way we do it. Go knock on their doors and have a conversation with their parents, or you open up your church for things, but we don't pull them out of school. And if you pull these kids out of school and their test scores fail, whose fault is that? But that's another subject for another day. But again, as the Ohio Council of Churches, and within our own respective denominations and faith traditions, we are not in favor of any other religious tradition pulling children out of school to teach a version of faith and the Bible that has not passed muster with us. You know, we believe that God loves everybody, period. The groups that they're representing are people that are not, well, first of all, we must say the groups that they're working with are not affiliated with us or the churches that are associated with us. Most of our religious traditions are open and affirming and welcoming of LGBTQIA and trans people. So what they're doing goes against what we as our own faith traditions believe. And we are with honesty and we are with others who are against this. I mean, I wish I had been there yesterday, Christina. I'd had a whole lot to say to that man. Okay. And this is not parent rights. Okay. This is not respecting the rights of parents, because as a parent, as I said, I'm an empty nester. I got 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren. Nobody should ever come and expect me to sign off on anything that allows them to teach my children about faith, and I don't know what they're teaching.
Thank you. And that's an important point I didn't even mention, is that the curriculum, especially for LifeWise, the curriculum is completely hidden. Now you can, I think, get it for 48 hours now, but you're talking about K through 5 lessons and trying to review all of that in 48 hours.
And what they're at, they're going to get a bunch of them kids as child abuse cases.
Thank you.
You can't walk, Kate, how does a 6-year-old tell an adult that they're in sin and I don't have to do what you say? You're inviting children to get hurt. teaching them that they can disobey their parents, or they can call their parents sinners because of how they live. That is some crazy stuff.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. McIntosh. We're going to go to the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp, who is the Executive Director of Love Boldly and the pastor of Blue Ocean Faith Columbus. With a background in educational leadership and higher education, Ben is an author, educator, activist, public theologian. I got theologian, see, church geek, and Star Trek nerd. He's currently pursuing a theological degree at the Methodist Theological School in Ohio. Thank you, Ben, for being here.
Thank you. And good job. You got my last name right. I don't have a ton to add to what my colleague and friend just said. Love Boldly is the primary part of our organization is creating spaces where LGBTQIA plus folks can flourish, particularly within Christianity, but also in any faith context. We really aim for a world in which queer folks can flourish, can be involved in whatever faith community they choose, if they choose a faith community. And I think that brings me to our core concerns around LifeWise, around HB 445 and SB 293, is the fact that while the idea of release time for religious instruction applied across all religions, applied to programs like Martina brought up, that are world religious or world religions, is something of a good idea. The fact that organizations, primarily like LifeWise, are applying it to such a narrow idea of what Christianity is a really, really big problem. And one thing, not wanting to get into the debate about freedom of or freedom from religion, one thing that we don't talk about so much, or we haven't talked about so much in this debate, is the fact that, again, they are teaching a very narrow idea of Christianity. So narrow of a perspective of Christianity that even other conservative Christians may or may not agree. For example, anyone who's Roman Catholic, this is not Roman Catholic theology. This is not what Roman Catholics would teach their children. This is what evangelical Southern Baptist-ish might teach their children. As an organization working with and for queer folks, we were really alarmed by LifeWise in what it teaches about the queer community, how it explicitly, as Christina pointed out earlier, how it explicitly talks about LGBTQIA plus relationships, identities as sin or as sinful. And I would only echo then, again, what Dr. McIntosh said about it's also teaching students to disobey their parents, to consider their parents' relationships to be sinful. It is as if the people who are behind LifeWise have thought that because a commandment comes higher on the list, that it somehow trumps the other ones. And that's just the faith and theology part of what we're talking about. We are seeing LifeWise take students off campus under circumstances that students would never be allowed to be in and anything else related to school. We're seeing them miss recess, as someone put in the chat, it's the specials, the band, music, computer, etc. We're seeing them being removed from those times. We're seeing them being sent back to school with candy and other things to almost entice their friends to go with them or to convince their parents to let them go with them. I spoke to a mother recently who, while she was kind of questionable whether or not she supported the curriculum of LifeWise, as someone who's a little bit more on the conservative spectrum of Christianity, but what she didn't support is the fact that they wanted to take her kid out of school and have him miss what she considered to be integral parts of the curriculum. And there are so many what ifs here. There are so many problems with the overall model, that again, our organization, though we would love to see this RTRI programs work for many different faiths, feel that we have to oppose this bill, how it's being set up, and particularly LifeWise.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now so that we can open the floor for questions, comments, discussion.